December 13th, 1943. The sun rose over Assam, India, painting the Himalayan foothills in shades of gold and crimson. Second Lieutenant Philip Adair climbed into the cockpit of his P-40N Warhawk for what should have been a routine morning patrol. What you just saw was one file. The Cold War was fought in secrets like this. Cold War Black Files is where those stories resurface. Subscribe. New files declassified. Lulu Bell. That's what he'd named her. The name was painted just below the canopy. Every pilot named their aircraft. It was more than superstition. When you trusted something with your life every single day, it became personal. Adair ran through his pre-flight checks. Fuel, ammunition, controls responding smoothly. Everything normal. The engine roared to life. And he taxied down the runway at Dinjan Airfield and lifted into the clear morning sky. Below him, the airfield bustled with activity. C-47 transport aircraft lined up like patient elephants. The hump airlift operation. Flying supplies over the Himalayas into China. The most dangerous supply route in the world. Dinjan was the lifeline that kept it running. Adair settled into his patrol pattern, eyes scanning the horizon. The Japanese had been probing their defenses for weeks. Small reconnaissance flights, testing their response times, looking for weaknesses. This morning would be different. At first, they were just dots, dark specks against the eastern sky. Adair squinted, counted. His blood went cold. 64 aircraft, 24 Kai-21 Sally bombers flying in tight formation, while heavy bombers capable of turning Dinjan Airfield into a crater field. 40 Kai-43 Oscar fighters weaving protective patterns around them, fast, maneuverable, deadly, all heading straight for Dinjan. Adair's radio crackled. The other pilots were on the ground, scrambling to their aircraft, but they wouldn't make it in time. The Japanese formation was less than 10 minutes out. He was alone. The mathematics were simple and brutal. 1 P-40 against 64 Japanese aircraft. The smart play was to dive away, live to fight another day, let the anti-aircraft guns handle it. But the anti-aircraft guns wouldn't be enough, not against this many bombers, and those 14 C-47 transports on the ground were sitting ducks. Destroy them, and the entire hump operation collapsed. But thousands of Chinese soldiers waiting for supplies would go without. The war effort in China would grind to a halt. Adair made his decision in seconds. He pushed the throttle to full power and dove straight into the formation. The Japanese pilots spotted him immediately. A single American fighter screaming toward them. It must have looked like madness. One aircraft attacking 64. But madness had its own logic in aerial combat. Confusion. Disruption. Make them scatter. Make them defend instead of attack. Adair opened fire on the first bomber. Tracers arced across the sky. The bomber's gunners returned fire. He broke left, climbed, rolled back in on another angle. The Oscar fighters reacted, peeling off from the formation to intercept this suicidal American pilot. The bomber's formation loosened. Their run on Dinjan disrupted. Adair's guns hammered again. Another bomber. Another pass. The sky filled with aircraft, turning, diving, climbing. The furball of combat that pilots both dreaded and lived for. Return fire came from every direction. Tracers crisscrossed the sky like deadly geometry. Adair threw Lulu Bell into violent maneuvers. Barrel rolls, split S turns. Anything to avoid the streams of bullets converging on him. Then he felt it. The first hit punched through the fuselage behind his seat. A sharp metallic crack. Then another, and another. The hits came in rapid succession. 1, 2, 5, 10, 16 total strikes. The control stick in his hand suddenly went slack. No resistance, no feedback, like stirring water instead of moving control surfaces. Behind the cockpit, where he couldn't see, control cables had been severed, be sliced through by Japanese bullets. The right aileron jammed in place, locked at an angle by shrapnel damage. The nose of the P-40 dropped hard, 2,000 feet altitude and falling. The ground rushed up at him. The aircraft entered an uncontrollable dive. Every instinct screamed at him. Every hour of training, every briefing, every manual he'd ever read, they all said exactly the same thing. Damage controls meant immediate bailout, no exceptions, no hesitation. Pop the canopy, roll inverted, drop clear, pull the ripcord. Those were the steps, drilled into every pilot until they became automatic. His instructors at Luke Field had been absolutely clear about this. Captain Morrison had pulled him aside during training. Listen, Adair, if you lose control authority, you bail out. Immediately. No heroics. Attempting to fly with broken controls is suicide. You understand me? Suicide. Adair understood. But his hand didn't reach for the canopy release. Something was wrong. Not wrong with the aircraft. Wrong with what he'd been taught. The dive wasn't pure chaos. It wasn't the random tumbling death spiral the manuals described. There was a pattern to it. A rhythm. The aircraft was falling in a specific way. 1,500 feet. His mind raced faster than the diving aircraft. The control cables were severed. The right aileron jammed. But that didn't mean the aircraft had no control surfaces. Just that the normal controls weren't working. What did he still have? What still responded? His left hand moved to the throttle. The engine responded. Power changes would affect the aircraft's attitude. Create or reduce thrust. Change the airflow over the wings and tail. His feet tested the rudder pedals. They moved. The cables to the rudder weren't severed. He had yaw control. Not much, but something. 1,000 feet. The trim tabs. Small auxiliary control surfaces used for fine adjustments in normal flight. Could they do more? Could they compensate for the jammed aileron? His hand found the trim wheel. He cranked it. The aircraft's behavior changed slightly. The dive angle shifted a few degrees. It was working. Not well, not smoothly, but it was working. 700 feet. The ground filled his vision. Trees, rice paddies, a village. He was going to hit any second now. Adair stopped thinking in terms of normal flight. The P-40 wasn't a functional aircraft anymore. It was a damaged object falling through the air according to aerodynamic principles. No, those principles didn't change just because control cables were cut. He had to fly it like something else entirely, like a glider with asymmetric damage, like a test aircraft with experimental controls, like nothing anyone had ever tried before. The throttle became his primary pitch control. Forward for nose down, back for nose up. But the response was sluggish, delayed. He had to anticipate, lead the aircraft's reaction by seconds. The rudder became his roll control, coordinated with throttle changes, building pressure on one side, creating a skid that translated into bank angle through the damaged control surfaces. The trim tabs became his stability control, holding the aircraft in a barely controllable equilibrium while he worked the throttle and rudder. 400 feet. The dive began to shallow, degree by degree, and the ground was still rushing up, but the angle was changing. Survivable was becoming possible. 200 feet. Adair pulled back on the throttle. The nose lifted slightly. The aircraft transitioned from dive to level flight. Barely, shakily, like a drunk trying to walk a straight line. But it was flying. He was over enemy territory now. 43 miles from Nagaguli airfield, the nearest friendly base. 43 miles of jungle, mountains, and Japanese patrols. The P-40 wallowed through the air like a wounded bird. Every control input was a negotiation. Too much throttle and the nose pitched up dangerously. Too little and the dive started again. The rudder had to be coordinated perfectly, or the aircraft snap-rolled. Adair's hands and feet never stopped moving. Constant adjustments, reading the aircraft's behavior, feeling the airflow, predicting what would happen 3 seconds from now and making corrections in the present. His mind built a new understanding of flight. Not the smooth, controlled flight from the training manuals, but the messy, improvised flight of broken things that refused to fall. The damaged aileron was creating asymmetric lift, more on the right wing than the left. That wanted to roll the aircraft right. But the jammed angle was also creating drag. That wanted to yaw the aircraft left. The two forces fought each other, created a bizarre equilibrium that Adair could exploit. He learned to use the asymmetry. Instead of fighting it, he built his control strategy around it. Let the aircraft want to turn right. Use rudder to prevent the turn until he needed it. Then release the rudder and let the turn happen. I used throttle to control the rate, mile after mile, constant concentration. One mistake, and he'd cartwheel into the jungle. He flew low, treetop level, not by choice. The damaged aircraft couldn't maintain altitude reliably. Better to stay low where he could make an emergency landing if the controls failed completely. The Brahmaputra River appeared ahead. Following it would lead him to Nagaguli. But river valleys created turbulence, rising air from sun-heated water. Crosswinds funneled between hills. The P-40 bucked and shuddered. Adair rode it out, making constant corrections. The aircraft wanted to roll inverted in the turbulence. He prevented it with bursts of throttle and opposite rudder. Barely. 30 miles. 20 miles. 10 miles. Nagaguli airfield appeared in the distance. Never had a runway looked so beautiful. But landing would be the hardest part. Normal landing procedure required precise control of airspeed, descent rate, and attitude. He had imprecise control at best. The approach would have to be perfect. No go-around possible. One chance. He set up for a long, shallow approach, giving himself time to make corrections. The airspeed bled off slowly. Too slowly. The throttle response was delayed. He had to reduce power earlier than normal, anticipate the aircraft's sluggish reaction. On the ground, the crew chief was watching the sky, waiting for aircraft to return from patrol. He spotted the P-40 in the distance. Something about it looked wrong. The approach angle was too steep. The aircraft was wallowing. No pilot flew like that unless they were injured, or unless it wasn't an American pilot at all. And Japanese forces had captured American aircraft before, used them for sneak attacks, flew them right up to friendly bases and strafed everything in sight. The crew chief grabbed his rifle, yelled for the guards. Half a dozen men took up positions, weapons aimed at the approaching P-40. In the cockpit, Adair had no idea he was about to be shot at by his own people. All his attention was focused on the runway, getting the damaged aircraft down, 500 feet. The throttle back to idle. The nose wanted to drop. He caught it with a tap of power, back to idle. The descent rate increased, 300 feet. The end of the runway visible. He was high, too high. Needed to lose altitude faster. But diving would build too much speed. He slipped the aircraft, crossed the controls, rudder left, using throttle to create a right banking tendency. The P-40 skidded sideways through the air, altitude dropping without excessive speed building. 100 feet. The ground crew saw the maneuver, saw how wrong it looked. Their fingers tightened on triggers. Then someone saw the markings. American insignia. The name Lulu Bell painted below the canopy. Hold fire! Hold fire! That's Adair! 50 feet. Adair leveled the wings, lined up with the runway centerline. The wheels were coming down. That was automatic. Gravity and airflow forcing them into position. 20 feet. The ground rushing up. Too fast. Still too fast. 10 feet. He cut the throttle completely. The nose dropped. The main wheels hit hard. The P-40 bounced, came down again, bounced again, settled. The aircraft rolled down the runway, and Adair's feet worked the rudder pedals, keeping it straight. The P-40 slowed, stopped. Silence. Just the ticking of cooling metal. Adair sat in the cockpit, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. He'd flown 43 miles with severed control cables and a jammed aileron, using techniques that didn't exist in any manual, understanding aerodynamics in a way that only made sense when everything else failed. The canopy opened. Ground crew swarmed the aircraft. They stared at the damage. 16 bullet holes, severed cables, the jammed aileron visible now. How the hell did you fly this thing? Adair climbed out, legs unsteady. I stopped trying to fly it normally, started flying it the way it wanted to be flown. The crew chief examined the control cables, completely severed. Sir, Every manual says you bail out with damage like this. The manuals are wrong. They pulled Adair's after-action report that afternoon. He tried to explain what he'd done, how he'd used throttle as pitch control, rudder as roll control, trim tabs as stability control, how the asymmetric forces from the jammed aileron could be exploited instead of fought. The intelligence officer wrote it all down, but the report was never distributed, never added to training materials, never incorporated into official procedures, because what Adair had done couldn't be taught. It required understanding the specific damage to the specific aircraft at the specific moment, reading aerodynamic forces in real time, making split-second decisions based on feedback that normal instruments couldn't measure. It required thinking beyond the manual and beyond procedures, beyond what instructors said was possible or impossible. Back at Dinjan, the 14 C-47 transports were undamaged. The Japanese formation had been disrupted, scattered. Their bombing run aborted. The airfield was safe. The hump airlift continued. Supplies flowed into China, because one pilot refused to bail out when every rule said he should. Philip Adair flew 139 combat missions over the course of the war. He achieved ace status, shot down multiple enemy aircraft, survived situations that killed other pilots. He was promoted through the ranks, made captain, major, lieutenant colonel, colonel. He retired in 1971 after a distinguished career. And he never flew with severed control cables again. Never had to recreate that impossible flight from Assam to Nagaguli. I never had to prove that damaged aircraft could be flown in ways the manual said were suicide, because some lessons can only be learned once. In the moment when training ends and instinct begins, when understanding matters more than procedure, when one pilot, one damaged aircraft, and 43 impossible miles changed everything.